All right, so we're going to get started talking a little bit about academic accommodations and disability services at Lord Fairfax. My name is Vivi Mader, and I write the academic accommodations for the Middletown campus. And then we have another disability counselor who works on the Fairfax side, Fauquier side, excuse me, Andrea Lowe. So we kind of collaborate a lot, and you'll be assigned one of the two of us for your academic accommodations and disability services. So mostly what I wanted to talk about today are some of the differences between what happens in high school versus what happens in college, and then to just briefly go through the process of how one would go about getting academic accommodations. So the biggest thing is we really expect when you get to college that you are actually ready for college level classes. Just because you are a human being who needs academic accommodations does not mean that you are not ready for college. So we expect you to come to us with a certain level of critical thinking skills and the understanding that in college you're going to be working a lot more independently than you do in a high school setting. So as an example, in high school, students usually have a case manager or at the very least a guidance counselor who helps to remind them to do things throughout the week, who sends them, periodic email reminders, who comes and finds them in their classrooms to pull them out for meetings and things like that. You do have some supports like that in college, but not nearly as many as supports like that you had in high school. For the most part, we don't necessarily come and find you. We especially don't come and find you in your classes to see how you're doing. It's more of a you come to us scenario once you get to college. So we do expect you to keep up with the college pace. Classes tend to move a little bit more quickly than they do in high school. And in order to be successful, a lot of college students have to have really strong self-advocacy skills. We say that it's a good idea for you to learn how to be a good self-starter. And you can do that by asking questions, joining study groups, participating with tutoring, making study schedules, learning how to be organized or working with someone who can help you to learn the skills to be organized. There's a lot more learning in college that happens outside of the classroom than inside of the classroom as compared to high school. So we have a lot of student supports here at LFCC. We have the testing center, we have the tutoring center. Andrea and I are writing academic accommodations. We also have TRIO and Great Expectations and veteran services, all the things that you've probably already heard about multiple times by this point, hopefully. But you do have to kind of seek out the services that you feel are going to be best for you. Ooh. What? No, what happened? I got to go back one. I got to go back a lot. Okay, here we go. So a couple of things that are different in college versus high school. Obviously, in the K through 12 system, in order to get an IEP or 504 plan, a parent usually comes to the school and says, hey, my child might need these services. Or the other thing that could happen is the school identifies you. So a teacher might recommend you for a child study process. So the school and the parent really become partners and work together to get the child services. When you get to college, you're not a child anymore. Now you're an adult. So if these are services that you think would benefit you, you have to come to us. You have to provide us with your documentation. You have to self-disclose that this is a service that you need, and you have to apply for the services. And in a sense, you really do have to become your own advocate. While Andrea and I are both happy to step in if a student does request it to help navigate certain situations with professors or school personnel, for the most part, we really want you to learn the skills necessary to be able to advocate for yourself, because college isn't it for you. You're going to move on after LFCC and either get more education or you're going to go out into the workforce. So this is a life skill. It's not just an LFCC skill that you need. We also maintain more confidentiality. If you were a student who had an IEP in high school, then you're very familiar. Those are very long documents. They include not just your diagnosis, but also your testing results. They talk about what you're good at, what you're not good at. They sometimes have teachers' notes in them about how you have advanced in their class over the year. We don't include any of that in your academic accommodation letter in college. It's one sheet of paper when you get to college, does not have your diagnosis, doesn't disclose why or how you qualified for the services. And once again, that's your personal, private, protected information that you can share if and when you feel is necessary. So you're in the driver's seat when it comes to that. You are also responsible for letting your professors know about your accommodations. And once again, in high school, your case manager is the one who meets up with your teachers and gives them a copy of the IEP. And a lot of times they have these meetings where you're not even necessarily involved about what's going to work for you in a classroom environment. None of that happens for you in college anymore. So I write the letter, or Andrea writes the letter, we hand it over to the student, and the student turns it in to the professor and discusses with the professor what the needs are. We're very hands-off, and that's going to be true of any collegiate institution, college or university that you go to after LFCC. There's also some differences in the types of accommodations that are offered in high school versus college. I think one of the best examples that I can provide for you regarding that has to do with personal aids. So students who need personal aids in high school or middle school or elementary school, that's something that schools provide to students. So they find a person, they pay for that person to be with you every day, they make all the arrangements. In college, you can have a personal aid, but we are not a part of that process at all. We don't have personal aids that we provide to students. We do not pay for personal aids. So you will be responsible for finding that human being to help you navigate your classes. And there's some other differences too. You know, when you go through the academic accommodation process with Andrea or myself, we talk about that. So we'll go through all of the accommodations that you received in high school and whether or not they translate to college exactly as they are or what those differences might be. Another one could be small group testing. You know, when you're in high school, it's time to take a test. Usually your case manager or resource teacher comes to your classroom and they collect you and they funnel you off into another room somewhere and they have your test for you. And in college, we don't have a person who comes and collects you and does anything with you because that's kind of creepy. But what you can do is take your test in the testing center. So that's just, you know, some differences. You're getting the same service, essentially. You're testing in an area that's quiet and private, but it's a difference in how that's delivered to you. The other thing that is really important as you become an adult and your parents sort of step out of the picture and allow you to take the reins is it's really important for you to be familiar with the law, okay? So the ADA is a very cumbersome document, but I do recommend that every single student that is ever going to be receiving accommodations, either, you know, in their education or in their workplace, reads and is familiar with the ADA so that you can know whether or not your rights have been violated. Typically, when someone does violate your rights, they don't tell you they did so afterwards. So if you are not familiar with how the law works, you can find yourself in a situation where you are not receiving the accommodations that you should have. And if no one is advocating for you, that will just continue on until someone does. And usually that someone is you, okay? You can find the ADA, all their policies and procedures and updates. It's all online. I think it's just ada.gov if you want to read it. And, you know, maybe you want to print it out and have a novel sitting next to your bed that you go through, you know, occasionally. Maybe not. I don't know how you want to handle that, but I do recommend that you familiarize yourself with the ADA. Oh my lands, every time I press the thing, it takes me too far out. Okay, so the law. I'm not going to go through the entire ADA, obviously. The only thing I'm going to point out to you about the law and how the law changes is that when you are in public education, when you are in the K through 12 system, I guess you don't have to be in public education, but mostly in public education, the law states that your school has to pave the way for you. So they have to make sure that you have access to the education that you require and that they give you that education, okay? They have to make it happen. Once you get to college, we do not have to necessarily make anything happen other than the access part. So we are responsible for making sure that you have access to class material, access to content, but we are not responsible for making sure that you do things like make it to class on time and stuff like that, okay? So we give you the access and then all the responsibility falls on you. That's where the law changes. Okay. So once again, high school, your services and supports are designed to maximize student potential. And in college, all we're doing is evening out the playing field for you. We're trying to remove the barriers so that you and your classmates, you and your peers are all starting from the same starting point. And that's, you know, one of the differences, one of the big differences. Sometimes students struggle with that a little bit. There's a great quote that I totally love because it's so perfectly, you know, highlights what those differences are. So the key point to remember is that generally the purpose of IDEA, which is what you have protection under in the K-12 system, is to ensure that students are successful in the K-12 system, whereas the ADA and Section 504 only ensure access because success in college is up to the student. Yikes, that's kind of scary, but that's the reality of the situation. And that doesn't mean that just because you're in the driver's seat that it's going to go badly. Okay, so just keep in mind that this education, it belongs to you now. So it's important for you to be involved and to care a lot about what happens to you when you're in college. Okay, some more differences. There's like a lot of differences. Keep in mind now you are an adult. So before you were a kid and your parents or advocates or whomever raised you, we say parents a lot, but really it could be whoever it is that you lived with growing up. They're included all the time in all your meetings. They sign all your documents. They sign your 504 plans. They sign your IEPs. And in college, you know, your parents, your advocates, your family members, your spouses, they can be included in the sense that you can invite them to meetings if you would like for them to be there. But my focus and Andrea's focus is always going to be talking to you, the student, and making sure that you, the student, are getting the things that you want and not necessarily the things that your parents think are important. And that can be really tough. Now, I'm a parent too. So I can tell you that it is really hard for me not to jump in every time my child has a meeting of any kind. But this is just the reality of becoming an adult, okay? Another thing is you don't really have to worry about explaining your accommodations over and over and over again because we don't typically have class substitute teachers. Or even different types of classes. So there's no like Bio 101 and then Bio 101 resource class. It's just one class that everybody goes in with one professor. And keep in mind, the professor doesn't know the nature of your disability, just the accommodations that you're going to require to be successful in that class. Geez Louise. Okay, more things. Communication with parents. Once again, part of the IEP in high school may include that people are following up with your parents in terms of your grades even. So someone from your school might have to call, usually it's your case manager, might have to call your parents and say, this is where we are grade-wise. And by law in college, we cannot share that information. You can sign a FERPA so that if your parents are, or your guardian or whomever, is interested in learning some information about you, they can contact us and we can share what you have signed off on your FERPA, but we're not going to be calling and offering up information as a part of your academic accommodations. K-12, keep in mind, school is responsible for arranging for you as the student to receive accommodations, and college, you are responsible. So every single semester, you have to request your accommodations, and every single class, you have to turn in that letter. You have to make sure that that letter gets to the testing center. You have to make sure that that letter gets to the tutoring center. It's a lot, and it does require some organizational skills. But you can do it. Lots of students do it. It sometimes is a rocky transition. Sometimes it's super smooth transition. A lot of times students really like being in the driver's seat. You know, they like that they don't have to rely on a case manager anymore. So keep that in mind too. All right. So those are some of the broad spectrum differences between high school and college accommodations. So how do you as a student get academic accommodations? So the general process is, first of all, you have to actually apply to the college because we don't write letters for students that are not actual college students at our institution. We also do not write letters for students that are not enrolled in classes. So if you haven't enrolled yet, we're gonna wait to write you your letter until after you've been through that process. So you're gonna apply to the college, then you're gonna go to your new student orientation. Then you make your new student appointment, which is where we help you register for your classes. And then finally, we do your disability intake and write your academic accommodations for you. All right, so you're enrolled in classes. Here's the types of disabilities, some of the types of disabilities that we accommodate: deaf and hard of hearing, vision impairment, ADHD, generalized anxiety disorder, bipolar disorders, dyslexia or dysgraphia is another big one, traumatic brain injuries, specified learning disabilities, which there's practically millions of, processing deficits, expressive language issues. I mean, it can go on and on and on. So, you know, if you are a human being who maybe didn't have an IEP previously or didn't have a 504 plan previously, don't think that that doesn't mean that you can't get accommodations, because you probably can. We give out accommodations for medical conditions and diagnoses. We give them out for learning disabilities. We give them out for mental health conditions. We also can write temporary accommodations. As an example, I had a student, I think 2 semesters ago, she got into a car accident and she broke her leg, had 2 classes almost back to back, and she was afraid that she wouldn't get to the second class in time because she was limited in her mobility. So we wrote a temporary accommodation to give her a delayed start in the second class by 5 minutes. So she's not considered late, as it were, to her class, and within a 5-minute period of that class beginning. And it was just good for the 1 semester because that's all she needed it for. So sometimes, you know, you have a medical condition that only impacts you for a brief period of time. You may still qualify for academic accommodations for that. It is always worth exploring. So once you have gathered up, you know, your documentation, and I think we'll talk about that in another slide, you want to actually apply for disability services. So you want to go to our website, www.lfcc.edu/disability. You can also get there with /accommodations. And we have our application right there on the website. You can fill it out and email it directly to me or to Andrea Lowe. Our email addresses are also on the website. We receive that and we can give you a call or an email back and set up a time to meet for your intake. You're going to have to turn in documentation in order to qualify for those accommodations. So we want to see, hopefully, the most recent thing that you have. Could be a psychological evaluation, a medical report, a letter from your doctor, a letter from your counselor, your IEP, your 504 from high school, you know, whatever it is that you have, just send it to us. We're always happy to take a look and see first if it's going to work or not, and then let you know if there's something else that we need a little different. We say that we don't want it to be any older than 3 years. In all honesty, sometimes we do take things that are older than 3 years. So once again, if what you have is older than 3 years, please just turn it in and we'll just take a look and let you know. The other thing is we prefer for what you turn in, if it did involve testing, that the testing be done using adult norms instead of norms made for kindergartners and first graders, because you are no longer a kindergartner or first grader. So, you know, hopefully, especially if you've had an IEP, hopefully they've retested you since that time. Sometimes an IEP or a 504 plan are not sufficient forms of documentation for your disability. I will say more frequently the issues with the 504 plan as opposed to the IEP, because 504 plans usually indicate that you were not tested within the school, that they wrote a plan for you based off of documentation that you turned into them. So they maybe wrote you a 504 plan due to a medical condition based off information that they received from a medical practitioner. So I need to see the thing from the medical practitioner to write my letter of accommodation as opposed to your 504 plan. So have the IEP, have the 504 plan. They're always helpful for us to see those things, but keep in mind that we may need to see something additionally beyond that and be prepared for that. You know, if you have ADHD and you go to see your PCP for medication for that, email your PCP or give them a call and see if they can write you a letter that you can turn into us. Most practitioners are really great about doing that kind of stuff very quickly for students. So examples of reasonable accommodations, things like extended time on tests, the ability to record lecture, priority seating. Some students need sign language interpreters. Some students need reduced distraction testing, or what used to be called small group testing, note-taking options, alternative formats for your textbooks, a little bit more time for in-class assignments. These are very common accommodations that you're looking at right here that a lot of students receive, but these are not the only accommodations that students receive. So your letter is going to be very similar to your IEP or your 504 plan in that it is going to be tailored to your specific needs based off of your diagnosis and your learning styles. So that's why we have that intake, so that we can ask you questions more specifically about what school has been like for you up until this point, so we can figure out what is going to be reasonable for you. So we talked a little bit about this beforehand, but keep in mind that we also have a lot of support services at LFCC beyond just academic accommodations and disability services. We also have the tutoring center. We have people within the tutoring center that can help you with writing. We have our TRIO program and Great Expectations and veteran services. We also have an individual who works with international students or students who speak English as another language. So there's lots of support services available at LFCC, which is totally phenomenal. There are some schools out there who don't even have half of the support services that we have. So our students, I feel like, are really supported a lot in our institution. But once again, these services don't come to you necessarily. So you have to be able to be cognizant enough of how you're doing as a student to know when to reach out and where to reach out to. And once you do, you'll find tons of support and tons of help. I did want to talk just very, very briefly about TRIO, because if you are receiving disability services, I do think that this is another program that you should apply for. TRIO is a federally funded program that's for first-generation college students, meaning neither one of your parents or your caretakers graduated from college. It's for students who are considered to be low-income students, or it is for students who have a documented disability. If you are a student receiving academic accommodations at LFCC, then you qualify for the TRIO program, and therefore you should apply for the TRIO program. They only generally have a certain number of spaces per year for students. So do get your application in earlier in the fall so that you can be considered for the program. But it's great because it offers that extra layer of support. It's just another safety net for students, where you can access things like free printing, one-on-one tutoring, quiet study space. You have even more access to specific types of advisors and things like that. Plus, we have additional grant money and gas cards that we can give to students. So once again, it's all about removing those barriers that students have that get in the way of success. So if you do have an academic accommodation letter, you should apply for TRIO most definitely. Oh, why can't I go in here? Oh, and that's it for my PowerPoint presentation, which is why I'm pressing the button and it's not going anywhere. Okay, so if you ever have any questions about disability services, you can reach me directly. My email address is vmeder, M-E-D-E-R, @lfcc.edu, or please visit our website, www.lfcc.edu/disability, or lfcc.edu/accommodations. And you can get linked to either myself or Andrea through our website. Chris, that's all I got.
Awesome. Thanks, Vivi.
Yeah, no problem.
I'm going to throw up our entry form for our giveaways really quick. Darian, I see that you're on the call. Make sure that you submit this entry form for attending Vivi's session today. Just go to tinyurl.com/LFCC-summer 2020. You're going to be entered for an iPad mini, AirPods, or Nintendo Switch. We'll announce those Monday morning in our engage email that we send out. And if you are watching this as a recorded message, just make sure you get your entries in by Sunday at midnight.